I don't think I've been celebrated like that since my wedding. It is great to be here with you again, and let me go ahead and get the technology started up here. Hope you've all had a good week, and the lasagna was, in fact, technically proficient and lovely. It must have been the physics and the math putting it together to get the right quantities and everything. Perfect. Okay, let's in our last lesson. We've haven't we? Gosh, 3 weeks. And by the way, hello to the YouTubers as well. It's good to have you with us. We have covered a lot, all the way from Genesis up to the early chapters of Exodus. We talked about the Abrahamic covenant, and we talked about the heroes of faith living in the land of Egypt, that we saw those exemplary people and individuals acting faith in small ways and sometimes very big ways in the context of an oppressive civilization. When we last were here together, we also saw Moses, and he was shepherding his father-in-law's sheep, and he was on the far side of the wilderness, and he had come to Mount Horeb, and there was a bush burning in the distance, which caught his curiosity. And then he turned to look, and he kept shepherding the sheep, and he turned to look, and then he stopped, and he gazed for who knows how long, but it was the act of turning aside and looking that then prompted this theophany, God to speak to him. If you remember, we talked about how we have to cultivate in our own lives the habits, the practice of looking for the activity of God in our lives, and be sensitive to that. A series of objections from Moses. If you remember, we had the call, Moses, I'm going to send you to Egypt. And does anybody remember his first response? Not word by word, but just kind of generally, what did he say? Can anybody remember? Kind of why me, but specifically, who am I that I should go to Egypt and that I should tell Pharaoh to let your people go, right? It seems like a pretty reasonable objection. I'm 80 years old. I'm shepherding sheep. I don't have a rhetorical flair. I'm out in the wilderness. Why are you calling me? And then there was a second objection. That one, I'm not sure if you can recall it. Let's see if we can get it. Anybody remember? What's that? What am I supposed to call you? Let's suppose that I go to them and they don't believe me. What's your name? And we learned that the name of God is a verb. Isn't that interesting? And this verb was, I will be what I will be, or who I will be, or I am who I am. And there were 4 possible translations of it. And we talked about this being vital because it both talked philosophically about God being the ground of creation, the ground of all things that exist. He created them. He sustains them. But less philosophically, more practically, he will manifest himself exactly how he wants to manifest himself. And we don't have a say in that. And that is very particularly important for the Exodus because God is about to show up on the scene. Long period of silence. And it says in the text that he comes down and he's ready to act. God says, God will stretch out his hand, strike Egypt with wonders, so that Pharaoh will ultimately stretch out the Israelites. The verb is the same. I will stretch out my hand, so you will stretch them out. You'll send them away. Lots of miracles, lots of signs and wonders, but perhaps one that we predicted last week that was so unique was the sense in which the Hebrew women would then go to the Egyptian neighbors in their area, and those women living with them, it was very specific, this was for women, and they would say, hey, I love that gold and silver jewelry you have there. I sure love that cloak you have for your husband, and I love the shirt and tunic you have for your child. Can I have those? Not borrow them. And they'll ask very gently. They shall ask. They shall not go over demanding. You owe me this. And then God miraculously will grant favor to those who were part of a culture that was oppressing these people. And they would grant those things freely. And in this way, the Israelites would go out and would so plunder Egypt. And we talked about how that verb, it's in the PL form, it's a particular root stem of that verb that occurs again in a way that mean will. They will snatch these articles out and thus potentially, if we read it this way, rescue the Egyptians, giving them, particularly the women that they're dealing with in their households, one last opportunity at demonstrating humanity in the midst of this oppressive situation. But Moses is not yet done. In the 4th chapter, when we come there, we find that he's going to raise 2 more objections. And so that's where we start today. And today, overall, what we're going to do is we're going to continue the call of Moses, and then we will move into the conflict with Pharaoh. And so that's the order of what we're going to be doing. But let's start here with the call of Moses. Moses' third objection, and Moses said in reply, "Suppose they do not believe me, do not respond to my message, but they say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" Now, he had another objection like this. Suppose they say, "Who sent you? What's his name?" Right? Your ancestral God. And so Moses is given then 3 signs. I'm going to move this up because it cuts in and out a little bit. He's given 3 signs. Some of these signs you're probably very well familiar with, and perhaps 1 or 2 of them you may not be. And so let's go and take a look at these. The first sign, the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He replied, "A staff." He's a shepherd. Shepherds carry staffs. This staff will be with Moses for the rest of his life. It will mark him as the shepherd of Israel throughout his entire ministry. He replied, "A staff," and he said, "Throw it on the ground." And he threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and Moses fled from it. I mean, I would flee from a snake as well. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand." There's that language again of stretching out. God will stretch out his hand to strike. Moses is stretched out his hand and grabbed the snake by the tail, and he stretched out his hand and took hold of it, and it became a staff again in his hand, so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, of Isaac and Jacob, did appear to you. Now, there's some debate in the literature as to whether this is a snake or a crocodile. It's a small crocodile, right? But why might that be the case? Well, if he is going to go to Egypt, where the Nile is the source of life, and crocodiles live and occupy the Nile, and crocodiles are part of the pantheon of Egyptian gods, then there might be some sense in which the signification of a rod turning to a crocodile might mean something. But again, this is a sign for Moses. Who's he going to take this sign to? Now, careful. What does it say in the text? To Israel. What if the Israelites do not believe me? This is a sign for Israel. So then he goes on to the second sign. And the Lord said to him further, "Put your hand into your cloak." And I can't do that right now because I have so many cords in here. It would get caught. It would be impossible to pull it out. But you put your hand into your cloak. So he put his hand into his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was diseased. It was like snow. And I take this not to mean white like snow, but flaky like snow. Some translations might take it as white like snow, but I think it's a kind of a, something akin to leprosy or something, but it's a flaky disease on the skin. And he said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." And he put his hand back inside, and when he took it out of his cloak, behold, it had turned back, like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, then they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And then does anybody know the third sign? I go there. Yes?
Well, he took a picture of water and poured it on the ground, became blood.
Okay, so water becoming blood, but he took a picture of water and poured it on the ground. He doesn't do that yet, right, because he's in Midian. And so again, this is a promise that must be taken on faith, right? The earlier ones were actual miracles that Moses could perform in the sight of God, and, we're going to transform a staff into a serpent, and you're going to put your hand in, it's going to come flaky, and etc. This one, no, you have to believe the second time around, you can do this one. And that is turning water into blood. water specifically from the Nile. Okay, I want to pause there and ask, how do these signs relate to the revelation of God's name that we saw last time we were together? How might they be received by the Israelites? So I want us to take about a minute and a half or so to discuss those two questions. How does this relate, these signs, to and what he revealed there? And how do you think the Israelites would respond to this? Okay, go ahead and turn and talk to your neighbor. Yeah. Yep. Okay, let me get some feedback here. How do you think that these signs relate to the name of God, which was linked directly to the name Yahweh, the one who causes to be or become? How do you think they're connected? Let's get some ideas. What's that?
It's a change in state.
In state? And where do you see that one at in the signs?
Well, it's that thing when it's clean.
And again, right? You got to drink. But yes, there are transformations in every one of these. What might that have to do with the name of God?
He's transformative.
Transformative power of God. The idea, the notion that God will arrive and appear how he wants to. Right? I'm going to drop in a way and do something so powerful, so magnificent. Ideally, if you have eyes to see it and believe. And he's long-suffering in that way. So I think that's right. Now, how do you think it's going to be received by the Israelites? If you're not reading ahead, what do you think? Rejected? Okay. Just going to... There's really a couple of ideas, right? You can reject or you could accept. Maybe there's some medium position. We'll find out. Back to faith. We hope that's the case, that they will believe him. So these signs, as I said, are signs for the Israelites, and yet two of them will occur again before Pharaoh. Which are they? The snake and the blood. In fact, if you go around, I did this weekend trying to look for images. Like, okay, Moses before Pharaoh. Almost every image you get has a snake in it. You cannot find one. I couldn't find one, at least for free, that had just Moses talking to Pharaoh, right? Okay, all the paid for, or the free ones are with snakes. Okay, so the first one, the staff turning to the snake, and I want to show you here that there are some deep connections with not just Israel as signs. By the way, I think Israel might have seen them in some ways kind of magical signs of God, of power, of wonder-working power, but evidence that God had in fact been among them. But for Pharaoh, there's some very interesting symbolic connections. We are told that Pharaoh's heart stiffened. This is not in connection to this, but I'm pulling you forward into the narrative. Pharaoh's heart stiffened. The word in Hebrew is chazak, a triliteral root, chazak, meaning to stiffen. But if you refuse to let them go, shalach, and continue to hold them, again, chazak, blah, 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 blah. I will do X, Y, and Z. But notice the language here. You have, and I know you don't, many of you, probably most of you don't know Hebrew, but I will read them. That's shalach, to send forth or stretch out. That is shalach. That is chazak. And so we have here some interesting connections to language that occurs again. This is then a kind of prophetic performance when performed in front of Pharaoh. It is indicative of things that are to come. Pharaoh is currently stretching forth around the Israelites, holding them. Machazik, I believe. Machazik, holding them. Verb is stretch, as to stiffen. He's stiffening. the snake, when Moses stretches out his hand to pick it up, will stiffen. And you can imagine if this is a crocodile, what a symbol that would be. Right? I'm going to grab this crocodile and become a staff, but I control the crocodile. I control the snake. These are all symbolic actions designed to signal to Pharaoh the powerful work that's about to happen when the hand of God stretches forth to strike. They are not signs of Moses' magical powers. And in fact, it is Aaron that performs them in front of the elders. And it is Aaron that generally performs them in front of Pharaoh. So they're not designed to point to Moses as some sort of special, categorical, unique figure. They are designed, as signs are, to point past themselves to God. Okay, what about the next one that occurs? Do you remember of the three, which is the other one that occurs?
What? Leprosy.
The leprosy occur. It's the water into blood. Water into blood. And so let's take a look at that one. How might this be connected to Pharaoh? In some ways, you kind of go, isn't it obvious? Well, let's make it obvious. Let's state it. How might it be connected to Pharaoh? He killed the firstborn. And where did he have them killed? Yes. And you are not the first. And you YouTubers at home are not the first to make that connection. I want to take you back to a 1st century BC text called the Wisdom of Solomon, which says this. Instead of the fountain of an ever-flowing river, and this is, by the way, this is spoken of when he later on strikes the rock and water comes from the rock. So, the fountain of an ever-flowing river stirred up and defiled with blood in rebuke for the decree to kill the infants, unexpectedly. Enemies. See the connections? The text clearly says, the 1st century BC text reading Exodus going, yep, that punishment that God brought upon Pharaoh was inflicted particularly because he had commissioned all of Egypt to drown the kids in the Nile.
When you're talking about that, I'm thinking, blood is a sign of life. And so he's out of what Pharaoh did with the water death, God's bringing back life.
That is interesting. As a physician, certainly, and in Leviticus ritual system, we think blood is connected with life. I think this metaphor is a little unique because water is also associated with life. And turning it into blood, it's now no longer potable or drinkable. So then it's in a way over conquering the source of Egypt's life. And so you could go that route, but I see the metaphor a little differently, and both might be possible. Okay. So Moses is able to test out the first two signs in God's presence. He's not able to perform the third sign. Okay, so we see here linguistic connections with the first sign. We see structural connections or kind of metaphorical connections with what Egypt has done to God's third sign here. And then Moses now says, okay, I've got a fourth objection, God. Okay? All right. Moses said, please, O Lord, I've never been a man of words, neither in the past, nor even recently, nor since you have been speaking to your servant. But I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. And I've tried to translate these very literally. Because the word heavy is the same word that you will have with Pharaoh's heart heavy, hardened. There's two words that are used for his stiffening of the heart. Chazak, to stiffen the heart, and the other kavad, to harden or make heavy the heart. So God will use a man who is heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue to overcome one who is heavy of heart.
You mean stuttering?
Yes, well, not rhetorically proficient, not like me, of course. Just kidding. He or court or dealing with the public, he did not feel confident to speak eloquently, to convince. And we had seen encounter where he tried to convince a man, right, to stop beating a Hebrew fellow, and that didn't end too well. Moses ended up fleeing, and that one didn't work. Okay, what's God's response? And the Lord said to him, "Who made the human mouth? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will be with your mouth and will teach you what you are to say." Okay? I love the literal sometimes. The Hebrew is so visceral in it using body parts and images, just kind of rooted in the dust, if you will. I want you to take a little bit of time now to talk with your neighbor about how you would describe God's response. Take a minute. Go ahead. Seconds. Okay, what are your ideas? How would you describe God's response to this fourth objection?
Impatient.
What's that?
Impatient.
Impatient, okay, or I've got this. Reassuring, okay. Gracious, trust in me. Kind of yeah, okay, I'm going to start. So I've got it taken care of. You can trust in me. Let's see how it all looks. Let's see how it surfaces and fleshes out here. Wait a second. It's another objection housed within this objection. Please, oh Lord, send someone else. Let me just be blunt, okay? I've kind of gone around the edges. I'm trying to work into the argument. Maybe I can convince you, God, but let me just now state it. Please send someone else. Then the Lord became angry with Moses. Okay, there comes a time when you wrestle with God, you got to think, maybe God's going to be angry here because I'm not listening. And so always that, again, to go back to the idea of developing habits in our lives to cultivate a vision for God, so that when the call comes, that moment for your unique special call, whatever it may be, maybe it's your vocation in life, that you are sensitive to hearing the word. Even now he is setting out, isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? Now, God knows that Aaron's his brother. He's just kind of communicating. Hey, what about Aaron? We can do that. I know that he speaks well. Even now he's setting out to meet you. How is Aaron setting out to meet him? God already told Aaron, go out to meet your brother. Okay, so God's already been preparing this and kind of expected perhaps the fourth response. I will be with your mouth and with his mouth. Ehyeh. Do you remember that name? Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. I will be with your mouth and with his. And will teach both of you what to do, and he shall speak for you to the people. This is fascinating. He shall serve as a mouth for you. Right now, look, the word mouth is flexible in Hebrew. It can mean a mouthpiece, a spokesperson, all that kind of stuff, right? So when you read your average translation, it's going to say like a spokesperson. I like to keep it mouth because it just keeps on with the language builds and you just see what God is doing. I don't care if you can't speak. I will take care of the rest. I need a faith who will go and do as I say. And he shall speak to you for the people. He shall serve as a mouth for you. You shall serve as God for him. And you shall take in your hand this staff with which you shall perform the signs. Okay, think Moses is going to get it? Any more objections? He goes back to his father-in-law. Okay, so end of the theophany. He goes back and he says, let me go back to my kinsmen in Egypt to see if they're still living. And Jethro says, go in peace. And of course, yes.
What do you think is the timeline here?
Yeah. Well, there's a timeline of Moses' age. He's roughly about 80 because when he goes to speak to Pharaoh the first time, it says 80 and Aaron is 83. I'm going to talk to you about timeline in just a second because Moses obviously will pick up his bags and go right away.
But is this like a over like back and forth or over a week?
And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who sought to kill you are dead. Why does God need to appear to him again to tell him to go back to Egypt? He's slow. He's delaying. There's kind of pretty good acceptance of the idea that he's still dilly-dallying, wrestling with the idea of going back. Now, when you consider what was about to confront him, I get it. We probably all do. Sometimes the wishes, the commands, the instructions of God for us seem way too great. But all he asks is the first step, and then the second, and then the third. But you have to step forward. So he gets reassurance that the men seeking to kill him are now dead. So he takes his wife, puts him on a donkey, and apparently he takes his skinny dog. As you can see there. Okay, I love this. This is the Golden Haggadah, 14th century. He's a shepherd. He must have had a dog, right? Theoretically, that's pretty cool. I'd never thought about that. It doesn't say it in the text, but there it is. When you go back to Egypt, see that you perform all the wonders before Pharaoh I've put in your hand. I will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. The idea that God will stiffen Pharaoh's heart is a tough one. When I talk to my wife about this, she goes, I don't get it. That's hard for me to understand. We'll talk further about it, okay? So I'm going to put it on pause for now. We may not get to it until next lesson, but I promise you we will talk about it. And then a strange episode occurs. He continues on, you shall say to Pharaoh, Israel is my firstborn son. I've said to you, let my son go that he may worship me, yet you refuse to let him go. By the way, stretch forth my son, you refuse to stretch him forth. Now I will kill your firstborn son. We've already seen these moments where something that Pharaoh is doing is magnified by God. And I do believe this is linked to the notion of the hardening and stiffening of Pharaoh's heart. God says it will take a mighty hand to move him. And so when you have a tyrant who steps forward with one action, countered with a greater action, because they know the language of force, and that's what God is going to do and step in and counter that very powerfully. In fact, so powerfully that it is said of some of the plagues that we're going to encounter that never again in Egypt, nor will they ever. Okay, then you get this. If you can understand this, let me know. I've looked at the commentaries here. God encounters Moses at an encampment along the way, and I think, again, it may be, some speculate that he's dilly-dallying. He's taking more time still, hanging out at an encampment. Next step. I think we can do it, honey. Let's go. Get on the donkey. Let's go. Let's keep moving. And slow going to Egypt. And yet there's one major thing that still must be done. And that is Moses had grown up in Egypt under Egyptian ways. He had moved to Midian under Midianite ways. And he had not circumcised his youngest son. And something happens where the Lord encounters him. I don't know if the him is the child or Moses. Nobody does. I take it that he encountered Moses, meaning Moses got deathly sick. And that deathly sickness was approaching death and was specific to the fact that he had not yet circumcised his son. That's one way of looking at it. Why is circumcision so important that the very man God had just commissioned to go to Egypt would almost be killed, potentially, if this is talking about Moses, on the way to the mission, just because he hadn't circumcised his son? Can we go back to Genesis and the discussion we had in chapter 1? Does anybody remember why is circumcision so important?
It's a maximum sign of loyalty to God.
A sign of loyalty to God. A sign of the covenant made to the patriarchs. A sign of fecundity and to make a nation of this great people. It is in one act of this little boy a representation, a symbol of much greater deliverance for the entire nation. It is that significant. And so Zipporah takes a knife, circumcises the boy, and then throws it either at the boy's feet or Moses' feet. I'm not sure. But the Lord releases Moses from this sickness or from this encounter. So then he's supposed to go to meet Aaron in the wilderness. And look, Aaron encountered him. Isn't that interesting? The language is so interesting. God encountered Moses to kill him now, but he sent Aaron to encounter him, knowing that Aaron's going to encounter him. And so they encounter one another at the mountain, and he kisses him, and then he tells him all the words that God had told him to do and all the signs. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled the elders, which is exactly what God had told him to do. Go first to the elders. Aaron spoke, quote, all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs before the people. And the people were convinced. What is the appropriate action when you are God's presence is among you? Worship. The language here, the verb is they knelt and then prostrated themselves. 2 steps. But usually you'll see something like they bowed low and prostrated themselves. I didn't want to go with knelt because I was like on the edge of all the possible translations, but I think that's what it means. So I'm daring sometimes, but sometimes I'm like, no, I'm going to pull back. Okay. Afterwards, then the next step is, God said, go to Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, so that they may serve for me in the wilderness. Does it sound about right? You seen that language anywhere before? Chapter 3, verse 18. God told Moses to take the elders, go to Pharaoh, and say the following. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Please, let us take a journey of 3 days into the wilderness, so that we may offer sacrifice to the Lord our God. You see the difference? Do you hear the difference? The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Please, let us take a journey of 3 days into the wilderness, so that we may offer sacrifice to the Lord our God. Moses stepped too far. He did not repeat all the words of the Lord, as Aaron had done. In fact, he does not use the polite nah, please, if it please thee, this court language. He in fact says, let us go. Let my people go.
More like a demand.
A demand, right? That, I don't believe, was God's original intent. Now, however the will of God works. But God had commanded to do something. And Moses does something else. And the elders are not there. Why? Question. Yes.
I don't quite understood the part of going to worship God for 3 days.
Yeah.
Because what they're really supposed to do is free the Israelites, go to another land. Why would this initial exercise be in there?
Yeah. It's very, very interesting because are they lying to Pharaoh? Is it kind of a ruse to get them out of the land? And that's a question I'm going to have some coffee before I answer. It's a very difficult question. Is that yes, out, but to give Pharaoh an opportunity to allow them out. God's heart. Pharaoh's heart, and going for a year festival, right? They're out in the wilderness for a long time. But it's difficult. And I'm not fully confident in my answer. Just say that. Yes?
To me, it coalesces with the vision of the Son. This is not just any people. This is a distinct people with my distinctive mark. And this people, I am calling to worship me, and to be in this relationship with me, which we'll see, of course, in Technicolor at Sinai.
Yes.
In a second. So what I'm getting from your explanations is this growing sense. I'm not just interested in freeing a people. I'm interested in making a people that are distinctive, just like Christians called out by God, to live distinctively in
Yes.
community together.
Yes, absolutely. This is the birth of a nation. The birth of a nation set apart to worship God and set apart to be a blessing to all nations, going back to the Abrahamic covenant. And we believe that blessing comes through Christ, the seed of Abraham. Okay, Pharaoh's response is interesting because it's different than what Moses' response was earlier. Who am I that I should go? Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? Okay? I do not know the Lord, and neither will I let Israel go. Okay? Yes, I believe it is. Yeah. Yes. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews manifested himself to us. Please let us go a journey of 3 days into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, or else he may fall upon us with plague or sword. Do you hear something familiar there? Those are the words God told him to speak. Finally, he got there. But that is not where he started. And then he also added, or he may fall upon us with plague or sword, which makes a lot of sense to in that particular day with, if you do not serve the gods, in Egyptian thought, as in many people's thought, if you do not serve the gods, your nation may encounter plague, may encounter war, encounter difficult circumstances. This is the old theological concept of do ut des, I give to the gods that you, O God, may give to us, right? So we offer Roman sacrifices so the gods will protect the state. We offer Egyptian sacrifices so that, we do our Egyptian rites so that gods will protect the state. The God of the Hebrews, he may fall upon us with a sword. Yeah.
Well, what and the God of the Hebrews, it's like they're speaking of a different group.
Yet they're representing their group. Yeah, so Moses and Aaron are saying, they're representing the Hebrews, and they say, the God of the Hebrews has manifested himself to us, the Hebrews. Yeah. And ideally, the elders would have been there too. But the king of Egypt said, Moses, why do you distract the people from their work? Get to your forced labor. And Pharaoh continued, look, the people of the land are now so numerous, yet you would give them rest from their forced labors? He's being, in a way, kind of ironic or something like sarcastic or something. But if you go back to Exodus 1, remember that one of the reasons that the system of forced labor was put upon the Hebrews is because they were so numerous. And the Pharaoh at that time thought, if I just oppress them, we can restrain them. And this Pharaoh, too, it seems, if this translation is accurate, it's one of those strange little phrases, but he's also saying, they're now so numerous and you want me to take away that system which is keeping them at bay? So Pharaoh is involved in a system, an oppressive system of population control. And then he says, and you want to give them a Shabbat? That's the Hebrew here. Anybody know what a Shabbat is? A Sabbath. You want to give them a day of rest? It's v'hishbatem. You hear it? V'hishbatem. That's the word right there. So Pharaoh doubled down. Well, this is the overturning, go back to Genesis 1, of that sacred music. Time, the movement of the cycles of time. Pharaoh is operating in a way that is oppressing the people even from the Shabbat, which God had placed in the created order, for the leisure of humans. Pharaoh doubles down. He orders the heavier labor be placed upon the people. Now, here is the system of oppression as I understand it. There are some different terms. Sarei Misim, Hanoksim, Shotrei B'nai Yisrael. Supervisors, bailiffs, and Hebrew foremen. So Pharaoh had placed in this system some supervisors, Egyptians, but then Hebrews were down here managing the Hebrew work. And so what happens over the next chapter is a doubling down. I find this fascinating. He orders heavier labor. That's the same word of the hardness of his heart. The kabod. To be placed upon the people. The act of sacrificing is known in Hebrew as a form of service. Zavach. Or not zavach, but can't remember the name right now, but he actually orders more heavier service, meaning heavier, harder slave labor, when they should be having more meaningful religious service. It's really interesting, the word plays that go on here. Okay, when we hear of Moses, okay, so here we go. Here's the story as it goes on. This chapter, I'm going to go ahead and summarize it here. Pharaoh, they're lazy. This is why they cry out, let us go. Let us sacrifice to our God. Let heavier service be laid upon them. They have the same quota of bricks, but now they have no straw. Right? So what do the people do? Are they going to be able to keep up with that? No. Now they have to go to the fields to find whatever stubble they can and whatever other kind of things that they can do to put together the clay that kind of keep it cohesive. No longer given to them. So now the same amount of work is expected, or the same product is expected, but harder work, because now you have to have a new input process. Then the Hebrew foremen were beaten. Why were they beaten? Can't meet their quota. Can't meet their quota, so they get beaten. What are they going to do next? They're going to go complain. Who do they complain to? Pharaoh. Look how your servants are being beaten. You are unjust to your own people. We are people in your kingdom, and you're being unjust. Then leave, because Pharaoh says, heck no, keep it up. Keep up the hard work. Now they leave, and Moses and Aaron are standing there waiting for them as the Hebrew foremen come out of the palace, and they confront each other. You have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Do you remember that the word sword had been mentioned once before? Do you see all these word plays? It's just absolutely fascinating. When they make the request to go out, if we don't do that, lest God may bring a sword upon us. Well, now what in fact has happened, they're saying, you put a sword in front of us. We're about to die because we can't keep up with the quota. Moses returned to the Lord. It was Moses' pattern, habits, cultivating a vision for God. It was his pattern to go to the Lord. To return to the Lord says something. He's coming again another time. And that is his practice. Why have you mistreated this people? Since I first came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has mistreated this people, and you have not delivered them in the least. Last lesson we talked about the name Israel. Anybody remember the name Israel? What it means? Yisrael, to wrestle with God. Moses is here directly wrestling with God. And he's doing something that I think probably most of us have done in our lives one time or another if we are people of faith. And that is, something has happened in our lives, and we recognize that somebody's wrong or mistreated us. And then we go to God and we say, God, why are you mistreating us? Because we recognize also that God is somehow in charge of the universe. You see the tension? And so this is an interesting space to wrestle with God and say, why have you mistreated us? You said you were doing one thing and you haven't. And in fact, the guy that's in charge now is mistreating us further. It's a very painful place to be. And so you have to wrestle with God in those spaces. But in this case, God provides some insight into his mind. And I'm glad he does. I think one of the insights here is that God is patient. God is giving, more patient than we are, and he is giving in the words of 2 Peter 3:9. He does not delay his promise, as some understand delay, but is patient with you, not wanting any to perish, but all to come to repentance. Okay. Before we go on to the next slide, are there any questions? I just want to pause and take a little bit of a breather. I know this is a lot of information. Exodus is, 40-something chapters, right? I don't even know exactly how many chapters it is, so we can look that up. It's a lot. It's a long book, and so there's certain parts we have to go quickly. Any questions or thoughts? We've got a few minutes just to talk. Oh, that's an interesting question. What do you think? on what you've...
Could you repeat what was the
Do you think Moses was an introvert?
Well, he doesn't want to talk in front of people. He's off on his own a lot. He's always kind of small.
He's hesitant to take leadership. At this older age, when he was younger, he seemed more energetic to encounter evil, right, or injustice. Yeah.
He needs to take a lot of breaks after he's
Yes, he seemed to pause quite a bit. He's on his brother. And by God's permission, right? I've given you 4 now, and I'm not a good speaker. Come on. Please don't make me do this. Very possible. Okay. Here's what God says. I want you to take on the back of your handout a passage, Exodus 6, 1 through 8, and I want us to ask the question, how does God reassure Moses? Turn and talk to your neighbor for 2 minutes. Go ahead and take about 30 seconds to a minute to read that and then talk assurance. In the midst of this very difficult situation in which the Hebrew foreman and the Israelites have kind of rejected Moses. Okay. God's reaffirming his commitment to the people. Okay. The time is now. Yep.
And personalize it to Moses, where it's not going to happen sometime in the future. It's going to happen with you right then.
Yes. Because this is a deep moment of doubt for Moses. Right? He's been commissioned to do a thing, and first he encounters great, even over the people he's supposed to be leading. Steps is the time. I am who I am. Right? Yahweh. Notice that? I am Yahweh. I am Yahweh. He goes back to the name multiple times.
4 times.
4 times. Multiple times he goes back to his proclamation of his name, because that name means I am covenantally committed to you and to the people of Israel to act. Despite 400 years of silence, you might think it's just going to keep on going, but I'm going to drop in and do something powerful. Yes?
He also he had revealed his name to Moses, which he did not do to the patriarchs, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah. He revealed, or he worked with the patriarchs as El Shaddai, God Almighty, creator of the universe. With Moses, he will work as Yahweh, the one who manifests himself exactly how he wants to manifest himself among the people. Moses told this to the Israelites, but they would not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and because of their difficult servitude. Sometimes you have to move forward in leadership and in life against the headwinds that cause you to doubt, but you have to move forward in faith when it's dark. And so then we come to the conflict with Pharaoh, and I will end with this, and we're going to spell this out with the plagues and all that good stuff next week. But I want to open up with the first episode, which is before the plagues, and that is he goes in to Pharaoh. I told you can't find pictures without the snakes. There they are, okay? He says, I'm so poor at speaking, how will Pharaoh listen to me? He says it again. He's still objecting about his speech. Aaron will be your prophet. Let me repeat what I gave you. Sometimes God has to give us the same thing again and again until we get it, right? You know this. I know this too. I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring out my people. And then I love this part. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and they started out with the wrong language, using different things than God had told them to say. No. They did just as the Lord commanded. And we see movement in their own hearts, right? They had started out being too aggressive. They didn't say what God wanted them to say. They had to back up. Then they were saying too little because they had shot right out of the gate. And yet now when they go to confront him the first time before the plagues, they do just what the Lord commanded. And then you have the episode of the staff snake. Okay. So with that, we come to the end of our time today. We've got about a minute left. Again, do transformative work in Egypt. The signs which were for Israel, 2 of them will now be repeated with Pharaoh. The staff and the snake, and then the first plague, the water to blood. Both of those plagues, I will say, the magicians could do the same thing. They could emulate, simulate the same exact thing. This is interesting. The very signs that were meant for Israel now come to Pharaoh, and his court magicians can do the same thing. But we'll see that build, and we're going to watch all the plagues, and we'll get through the plagues next week. In the meantime, keep cultivating your heart, keep cultivating your vision to look for the activity of God in the midst of this world. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.